Parasha Shelach deals with the mitzvah of tzitzis. That the Torah tells us at the end of the parsha that there is a mitzvah of tzitzis, mitzvah of lavisha tzitzis, of wearing tzitzis. What exactly is the nature of the mitzvah, and how is tzitzis different than the other classical mitzvahs? So Chazal tell us that the mitzvah of tzitzis is different than the classical mitzvah. But other mitzvahs of eating matzah on Pesach, blowing shofar, hearing shofar, sitting in the sukkah, wearing tefillin, those are absolute requirements that one has, if one has an obligation to fulfill them. If you don't fulfill them, you are mavatel a mitzvah asa. You nullify a positive commandment. However, when it comes to the mitzvah of tzitzis, many learn that the mitzvah of tzitzis is a conditional mitzvah. You know, there are different types of mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs chiyuvis, absolute obligations, and there are those where if you do the mitzvah, you get a mitzvah min Torah, but if you don't do it, there's nothing wrong. There's no punishment. So people say the mitzvah of tzitzis is the obligation of wearing tzitzis is only if you're wearing a four-cornered garment. If you're wearing a four-cornered garment, akante b'dehem, and therefore you have a four-cornered garment, you're obligated to wear tzitzis. However, if you're not wearing a four-cornered garment, so then there is no obligation to wear tzitzis at all. So it's only a conditional mitzvah that if you reach the requirements, so then you have to do the mitzvah. But if not, there's nothing wrong with not wearing tzitzis. So they point out, so Rav Moshe has a famous tshuva on the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, on the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. He was asked, is one obligated to live in the land of Israel today? So Rav Moshe quotes the Machlokas Harishonim, that on one hand, he was asking the question, he says, the show asks, on one hand the Ramban writes that there's an absolute obligation, one has a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. On the other hand, Tosas at the end of Ksuvis quotes from Rav Chaim HaKohen that there is no obligation Mizman Hazeh because of Sakanas Drachim, the danger of travel, or it's difficult to fulfill the mitzvahs Hatuyas Ba'aretz. It's difficult to fulfill the mitzvahs that are dependent on the land. So therefore, he wanted to know, who do we go like? Do we go like the Ramban, that there's a mitzvah chiyuvis, an absolute obligation, or do we go with the Bali Tosas, there is no obligation? So Rav Moshe writes, and he has an interesting pshat in the Shita of the Ramban. He wants to claim that the Ramban also says there is no absolute obligation of living in Eretz Yisrael even today. Alright, so what's the pshat in the Ramban? The Ramban seems to say it's a mitzvah. So in fact he wants to bring a raya from the Lashon HaRambam, because the Rambam writes that maybe one can leave, there might be an issue to leave Eretz Yisrael, but there's no issue to live in Chutz La'aretz. If there was an absolute obligation to live in Eretz Yisrael, so then you wouldn't be able to live in Chutz La'aretz. So Rav Moshe develops the Shitat HaRamban, that it's what we call a mitzvah kiyumis, that there is no obligation to live in Eretz Yisrael, there's no mandatory obligation, but of course one who does live in Eretz Yisrael fulfills the mitzvah min Torah. So the classical understanding of the Ramban is it's a absolute obligation, and you have the Bali Tosas on the other end that there is no obligation at all today. So the way Rav Moshe learns the Ramban, it's somewhere in between the classical reading of the Ramban. That's the whole discussion as well. What is the Shittas HaRambam? Because the Rambam himself doesn't count the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. So you have a whole gamut of Shittas in the Rambam, whether he says it's a mitzvah in our Torah like the Ramban, or it's not a mitzvah at all. So either way, that's what Moshe writes in the Ramban. So in that sense, it's similar to the mitzvah of tzitzis. That tzitzis is clearly a biblical mitzvah, mitzvah in our Torah. However, one is only obligated if you're wearing a four-cornered garment. Of course, as the Gemara tells us in Menachos, so even though perhaps one might not be obligated to wear a four-cornered garment, but one should, as the Gemara tells us with this, the Malach came down, the angel came and said, Katina, Katina, tzitzis matahela. What's the mean with the mitzvah of tzitzis? How come you're not wearing tzitzis? So he basically said, well, I'm not wearing a four-cornered garment. So basically the Gemara says, you're right, but b'shas riska, the time of anger, time of danger, when God gets angry, so the tzitzis would protect you. In other words, tzitzis is like a life insurance policy. One doesn't have an obligation to wear it, but if you do it, one should do it. In fact, that's what the commentators point out. That's what the Gemara in Sota is saying. The Gemara tells us in Sota, Moshe was mitzvah to fulfill the mitzvahs Tue Jun. Moshe wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael so he could fulfill the special mitzvahs which are limited in the land of Israel. The shaila is, what was bothering him so much? You're not in Israel, you don't have to do the mitzvahs. So we see from the attitude of Moshe Rabbeinu that one should always put themselves in a situation, or one should desire a situation where you could do as many mitzvahs as possible. In fact, that's why we have on the negative sense that one should not put themselves in a situation, ein machtas atzmo, don't put yourself in a situation where it might lead to doing something. Or here, it's one should put himself away in a situation where they can fulfill positive commandments, but we also find similar in terms of not violating negative. In other words, there's a famous machlokas, the Ramban and the Balamor regarding Mila. And it's a whole discussion in the Gemara and the Rishonim. But basically, there's halacha, marchitin es hakatim elafnei hamila ben la'achad, is a mitzvah to wash the katan before and after the bris milah. Bismana said we don't do it, we don't need to, it's not a sakana anymore. So during Bismana the Balamor, so let's say you didn't do the milah yet, and the water got knocked over, so you don't have any water. So if you did the milah, everyone agrees you'd have to get a guy to go ahead and heat up that water. But let's say you didn't do the milah yet, so what should you do? So the Ramban writes, Ein l'cha mitzvah l'shaitz, you do the mitzvah right away, and therefore whatever happens, so they have to go ahead and heat up hot water, so let it be. And the Balamor says, no, you can't put yourself in a situation where you know it's going to be Gorem Chol Shabbos. It's going to lead to desecration of the Shabbos, and therefore the Balamor says, wait until Sunday. So we see according to the Balamor, but what avera are you doing if you put yourself in a situation where you might have to Machal Shabbos, but it's mutter, it's Pikuach Nefesh. Again, so we see one should avoid a situation where you're putting yourself in a situation where you might have to desecrate the Shabbos beheter. Or like there's a Machokas Minchas Chinuch with the Shelach regarding how far does the mitzvah of derech recholka go. We know there's exemption. Someone we are going to Pesach Sheni we're going to read about that there's an exemption. Someone who's tamei or derech recholka, you're tamei, you're defiled, or you're too far away, and you can't bring the carbon Pesach. So there's halacha Pesach Sheni. So the question is, what about someone who actively goes ahead and runs further enough away and he exempts himself from bringing the carbon. Is there anything wrong? So you have a discussion of the Minchas Chinuch and the Shelach in terms of what exactly, if anything, did he do wrong. In other words, well, right now I'm chutz from the place I have to be, so maybe I didn't do anything wrong. So what's wrong is you're putting yourself in a situation where you cannot fulfill the mitzvah of Karban Pesach. So to here, it's like the mitzvah of tzitzis. You have to put yourself in a situation where you could do the mitzvahs just like Moshe Rabbeinu was mitzvah. And that's why we point out that actually the beginning of the parasha deals with the meraglim, and the end of the parasha deals with tzitzis. So what's the juxtaposition, what's the connection between the mitzvah of tzitzis and the mitzvah of meraglim? So Rav Moshe writes and others, because what happened with the meraglim? It's Shelach L'cha. That basically it wasn't a mandatory spy mission. It was the people themselves wanted it. He said, Shelach L'cha, if you want to go, you could go. I'm not commanding you. So we see what could happen, something which could be voluntary, even though you don't have to do it, but if you volunteer it, it could lead to a disaster. Like it's much worse is someone who doesn't join the army, so you might go to jail. But if you join the army and then you run out in the middle, you're court-martialed. So we see from the story of the meraglim that even though it was done something voluntarily, yet it could lead with terrible results. So the mitzvah of tzitzis is the tikkun, is the rectification, that tzitzis is a voluntary mitzvah, and we do a voluntary mitzvah and create good things out of it, and to show that we learned the lesson from the sin of the meraglim. That's the yesod of the mitzvah of tzitzis, that even though one might not be obligated to wear a four-corner garment, but the minhag Yisrael is to wear a four-corner garment because we want to emulate Moshe Rabbeinu and put ourselves in a situation to fulfill as many mitzvahs as possible. The Torah tells us in Parsha Shelach, at the end of the Parsha, the story of the Mekoshesh Eitzim, the gatherer of wood. Vayu b'nei Yisrael BaMidbar vayemsu ish Mekoshesh Eitzim b'yom HaShabbos. The first Machalel Shabbos in Jewish history. This person was gathering the wood, and they brought him, like Yiro Hamotzim, they brought him out to Moshe, they put him in jail, and Moshe said, Moshe, you must, we're going out, the one who violates the Shabbos is liable to the death penalty, Vayomas kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe. So, this, by reading the Psukim in the Chumash, we see the Mekoshesh Eitzim is the first desecrator of Shabbos in Jewish history, and the impression is that this person must be a very vicious, Rasha, wicked person to go ahead and desecrate the Shabbos, the Dor HaMidbar. And yet, when we look into the Torah Shabbat Peh, when we look into our oral tradition, we see a totally different point of view of the Mekoshesh Eitzim. So, Tosfos points out that really, based on the Midrash, really this person was a tzaddik. But he was a tzaddik, he really wanted to save Klal Yisrael. Save Klal Yisrael by desecrating Shabbos. How does that work? So Tosfos explains from the Snichos HaParshas what just happened, the story of the spies, and the Jews were rejected now, and people thought, that's it. The Torah doesn't apply anymore. It's null and void. And the Mekoshes wanted to show people, no, Shabbos is still enforced. The Torah given to Moshe still applies, and he went ahead and he desecrated the Shabbos. So we see in Torah Shabbat Peh, Torah Shabbat Ksav makes this person into a Rasha. This person in the Dor HaMidbar goes ahead and desecrates the Shabbos. He's Mekoshesh Eitzim, gathering the wood, some type of malacha on Shabbos. Different opinions on what it was. And the Torah Shabbat Peh gives us a whole different story. that this person really had good intention. So two things. Number one is, it's true he had good intentions, but there are many ways to educate people. Or maybe they wouldn't have the same impact, but how about adult education? How about taking some kiruv classes, speaking about Shabbos? Isn't there some better way? Isn't there a mitzvah ba'avera? Like what? Isn't there a better way? How is he allowed a machal Shabbos to teach this lesson? So the Maharsha, others point out that really this person really wasn't machal Shabbos. He wasn't machal Shabbos. I thought he was gathering wood or whatever he was doing. So the commentators explain, to desecrate Shabbos on the Torah level, you have to do things the way it was done in the Mishkan. The 39 prohibited activities stem from the way it was done in the Mishkan. And therefore, one of the requirements are, you need a davar hamischaven, you need something which you have kavanah for, and it has to be a malacha tzricha gufa. In other words, the classical case in the midbar, if I'm, let's say, carrying, because I want something's in place A, I carry it because I want it in place B. But as the Gemara tells us in Shabbos, if you have a dead body in your house, and you want to get rid of it, you don't care where it goes, you just want it out of your house, that'd be a malacha she'ein tzricha gufa, and the way we pass, it's only a rabbinic prohibition. So really, what happened here, let's assume it was Hotzah. So really, he didn't violate the Issur D'Oraisa, because the biblical prohibition of Hotzah is carrying because you want something from one place to another. Here he was carrying to teach a lesson. So really, it was only a malacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa. It was only a malacha which wasn't done on Shabbos. It wasn't a malacha done the way it was done in the Mishkan. Hence, it's not a biblical prohibition. It's only a rabbinical prohibition. And obviously, at that point in Jewish history, there were no rabbinical prohibitions. So really, what he did was heter gamar, 100% permitted. There was no chilul Shabbos at all. And then they point out that, what about, okay, so true, so let's say it wasn't Machal Shabbos, but they didn't know that. The witnesses said, don't Machal Shabbos, do you know what you're doing, you know the punishment, and he seems to say he knows everything. So he knew he was going to be killed. So it's true he didn't desecrate Shabbos, but there's another strict prohibition in the Torah not to commit suicide. So if he knew he was going to be killed, so isn't that tantamount to suicide? As we know, generally speaking, it's v'chai b'hem, you have to live by it. Save the big three. Save the big three. You save the big three. You don't have to give up your life for it. The big three, meaning if someone puts a gun to it and says, don't worship idols, don't commit adultery, don't murder someone, you have to give up your life for it. But everything else is v'chai b'hem. So how could he go ahead and desecrate the shamans knowing that they're going to kill him? There's a prohibition of suicide. So in general, there's a machlokas, Rishonim, the Rambam, and the Bali Tosfos. On the three mitzvahs, you're obligated to give up your life. What about on Shar Averos? Let's say, I can't eat treif. I don't want to have Machal Shabbos. Can I give up my life if someone wants me to have Machal Shabbos or eat treif? So the Rambam writes, no. Areisem is chayav v'nafsho. If you don't have to commit suicide, it's usher to. And the Bali Tosfos says no. Of course, it's not an ideal situation, but we never force you to do an Aveira, something of eating treif or being Machal Shabbos. If you want to give up your life for it, you have that option. So, even according to the Rambam, the Mukhe Yosef, others point out, that even the Rama would agree under certain situations one is permitted to give up their life. And one is, let's say, if the Gadol Hador or one of the Gedolim, one of the Rabbanim see that they have to make a stand. Let's say Chilul Shabbos is rampant. Like the Gemara talks about someone who was trying to just ride a horse on Shabbos to make a mockery out of the laws. That look, I'm not desecrating Shabbos, etc. The Gemara talks about Makid Ba'onshin Shalom and Adin. Based on his ability in order to enforce the law, they could tell you, they could give you an onus, they give you a punishment on something, even stronger than it normally would be. So Makid Ba'onshin Shalom and Adin. So they point out that over here, Klal Yisrael was in danger. There'd be no more Klal Yisrael. What would happen? Look, at the end of Klal Yisrael, people thought the Torah wasn't nogay anymore, and therefore even the Rama would agree in a situation where he could save Klal Yisrael, and the Torah would be forgotten. One is permitted to give up their life al Kiddush Hashem. It's like an Eis Lasos, and that's what they point out. That's what they point out. Even the Rama would agree, and in fact, now we understand something else. So from the Torah Shabbat, this person was like a Russia, a vicious Russia, the first desecrator of Shabbos in Jewish history. However, we go to the Torah Shabbat, this person is not a Russia, but he's a tzaddik. And in fact, that's why we can understand another Gemara. The Gemara says, I think it was one of the rabbis was revealing this. You know who the Makoshes Eitzim was? He says the Makoshes Eitzim was good old Slavchad. We all know the daughters of Slavchad became famous. So Slavchad, he was the Makoshes Eitzim. That's why they didn't have Avinu Meis. That's what they point out. Avinu Meis BaMidbar. He died in the Midbar, and not from other means, therefore a way of them getting the Yerusha. But anyway, they point out that so one rabbi said, what are you doing? Lashon Hara. How could you go away? We learned from Ba'aloska, the end of the parsha, Miriam speaking Lashon Hara on Moshe. So how could someone reveal who it is? So apparently we see, obviously the rabbi, I think it was Rabbi Akiva, was obviously of the opinion that the Makoshish Eishim was Slavcha, and he was a tzaddik, and therefore Rabbi Akiva was able not only are you allowed to, but it's a mitzvah to mefarsim someone, it's a mitzvah to publicize when someone's doing a mitzvah. And in fact, that's what they point out. That's why it says that Yuvan Yisrael BaMidbar. Well, we know where they are. They've been in the Midbar all this time. So BaMidbar, that gets into the whole discussion of the status of the Midbar, whether there was Shusha Rabbim or not. So that ties into the issue whether in terms of Schofcha carrying or not. But the point being is, we see the koach of Torah Shabbat Peh, that the Torah itself doesn't say it, but he's the first Machal Shabbos, seems to be a very evil individual, and the bottom line is, no, really this person's a tzaddik, it is Chavchad, and that's what we see, that when we learn the parashas, we have to learn it through Torah Shabbat Peh, and that's in fact, that's how the Torah begins. Bereshis bara Elokim, God, literally, the beginning created God, but of course, it should have been Elokim bara Bereshis. So, the Rashi in the beginning of Bereshis, where does Rashi write? So Rashi writes, Bereshis bara Eina Mikra Hazeh Ela Darshuni. This pasuk is taking, you have to make a drush. In other words, there are 4 levels. There's pardes, there's an orchard, which it stands for. Pei is the pshat, is the simple reading of the pasuk. Reish Rem is an illusion. Dalet is drush homiletics, and so is secret Kabbalah. So why would the Torah begin a pasuk that you can't even read the simple explanation? The simple explanation, in fact, is the opposite. Bereshis bara Elokim, the beginning created God. That's heresy. Comes along the Torah and says, no, Einu Makadela Darshuni, no. It doesn't mean that. It means God created the world. It's like the Makosha Tetzim on the Torah Shabbat looks like it was Machal Shabbos, and he's Russia, but the Torah Shabbat gives us the real score. So that's what it says, the same thing here, the Koach of Torah Shabbat, that it's telling me that when you open up Bereshis, since it's a bunch of stories, you might think, you know what, I'll just go ahead and just say over my own shatim and make up my own stuff. The Torah specifically begins with Bereshis, Baruch to tell me that when you learn the Torah Shabbat, you need a Torah Shabbat Peh. And that's the same way we can't learn the story of the Makosha Sheitzim without looking into our oral tradition about the Makosha Sheitzim, who is Selevan.